Thank you, David. Just for everyone that was on, this session is being recorded. But good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the issue discussion call number 3, make or burn and surplus buffer. My name is Thomas Flitter, engagement lead for the GovComm team, and I'm joined with David and Artem is on, and many of you who I have read, discussed, chatted with, about some of these topics. So hopefully for a lively conversation today. As we progress through the presentation, please raise your hand, or you could just provide a comment in the chat function that David's helping monitoring, and we'll be able to try to answer your questions. Along the way, we also have a session at towards the end that we can have a nice open discussion about any comments, feedback, or questions that you have. Also, just as a disclaimer, I just want to go through that process, is that this is provided for information purposes only, and that the views and opinions expressed in this meeting are those of the people involved and don't really reflect the official policy or position of MakerDAO or any of its contributors, core units, or affiliates. Also, this communication makes no representation about the enduring accuracy of the information and appropriateness for a given situation. The content is provided for information purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or financial or tax advice. Consult your own advisors for those matters. References to any digital assets and the use of finance-related terminology are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute any recommendation for any action or an offer to provide investment, financial, or other advisory services. Whew. All right. With that said, we've gotten through all the nice legalese. Let's move on. Hopefully everyone is able to view the slides that we have here. And what we'll do today is we will go through a nice overview, talk about the make or burn and surplus buffer, and I want to go on to talking about our agenda. But before we move on, David or Artem, do you guys have anything that you'd like to add that I may have missed, since this is my first issue discussion call, our third one in line, but I wanted to see if you guys had anything to add.
Nothing for me. So yeah, we can move ahead.
Yeah, good to go.
All right. For today, we've done our welcomes and introductions. Our topics today, make or burn and surplus buffer. We'll also, after that, we'll have an open discussion and talk about any questions you may have. And then we're going to wrap up. It's going to be a little bit interesting. A wrap up talking about shaping the future topics for discussion. Today's topics were really derived based on a lot of the activity through the forum, through discussions, and feel like this is a good relevant topic to talk about here, as they are in informal polls, voting. But again, we hopefully today we'll be able to come up with some really good suggestions, maybe the recommendation about these topics. So without further ado, I want to move on let's start off with make or burn. Now, for make or burn, we really kind of start off with looking at it, say, hey, there's been a lot of, discussion, different opinions for burning maker, and also increasing the surplus buffer. When we look at, what is maker? And I've had to sort of teach myself a little bit being new to the company, but realizing there is over 900,000 maker tokens in public circulation. It's an ERC20 token that is native to the Maker protocol. It is a governance token and recapitalization source for the Maker protocol. But as a governance token, Maker is used by its holders to vote on a number of different things, which I found was very interesting. Voting is used to execute changes to parameters inside the Maker protocol, like stability fees, the DSR, debt ceilings, and many others. Voting is also used to make decisions on the non-technical aspects of the protocol, like asset priority lists, governance processes, role mandates, and even electing individuals to fill specific roles. So the MKR or Maker token, or however you want to talk about it or say it, is a source of recapitalization when the Maker protocol runs at a deficit. Maker has issued and auctioned to cover it. It was interesting. Launched with 1 million Maker tokens at its inception. That's an interesting number. The possibility of the Maker token supply dilution gives holders a strong incentive to govern the system well. And so there are responsibilities of the holders, and their primary responsibility really is to ensure the stability of the DAI peg. And that is what makes the Maker token interesting. That overall health of the Maker protocol, the holders really interested is to focus on improving and growing the Maker protocol by building out the governance processes and infrastructure. And I find all this very interesting, because then we have to sort of ask ourselves, well, what would incentivize us, or really what would incentivize us, drive us to want to burn Maker tokens? And so we have to look at really what's the current state of the burn. So if you look, when we're doing research, it says, well, what's your policy? What's your procedure? And understanding that, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's really no standard procedure or policy. What we do is it's really, I guess, a manual adjustment. And interesting too is that it ties really well with our second portion today, which is going to be the surplus buffer. So the buffer and the burn have really been adjusted manually in the interim. And looking at a lot of the discussion that's out there in the forum, also some signal requests, a lot of delegates, a lot of contributors, a lot of folks are saying, what is appropriate? Where do we need to take this? And I guess that's part of what our discussion will be here today, is really to take a look at where are we right now. We've done these manual processes. Is it more towards an automated process? Is it something that we can come along and during this discussion session and say, hey, here's some ideas. Here are some ideas that maybe we want to move forward. And I wanted to get everybody's, sort of thoughts and opinions. And so before I move on, have I missed anything, or does that all make sense about just, a little bit of background? I know a lot of the folks here know that information, but I wanted to ask David, is there anything else, or actually the folks out there, is there anything else you'd like to add to this very beginning section before we talk about the driving forces of burning and not burning the Maker token?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to emphasize, and you touched on it briefly, but it's this connection between the surplus buffer and the MKR burn. So you also talked about, whether or not the Maker protocol has a standard policy for how it does burning, and the functionality of the burn is somewhat like codified, right, in the smart contracts, where the surplus buffer has like a certain limit, and then when it passes that limit, it begins to auction off that excess DAI for MKR that's then burned. And so the way that we manage the surplus buffer and that little functionality is directly linked to how we manage the burn. And it doesn't have to be, but that's a conversation for later. But no, you hit on all the points, I think.
Okay. I was wondering if anyone else had any thoughts or questions before we go any further. All right. So the next little piece here that I want to talk about is, what are some of the incentives? What are the driving forces? We talked about, looking at the surplus buffer, but, the Maker functions as a recapitalization source for the protocol. And that means that it acts as a collateral of last resort to absorb losses beyond the expected losses from collateral locked in vaults. If burn happens, the Maker value is believed to be propped up, and therefore Maker is a more reliable recapitalization source. These are, again, what the community has laid out. Again, this is for information. This is information we have pulled from multiple sources, forum chats, informal polls. But I wanted to add to that is that, burning Maker increases proportional ownership for his existing holders. And it also adds die liquidity into the market. These are very interesting points. But it also creates demand for maker on the market. So if we think about all these different points, there's a lot that can be out there to say incentivize or drive, burning maker. But it also, and it was interesting that you could put it in a relationship term to a normal stock. It says it can be an efficient way to reward holders compared to dividends. This is, one way to take a look at it, but another one is that it's believed to increase maker value. Now, any of these points that I'm making, everyone, you can chime in and say, wait a minute, I have a different opinion on it. Please let me know, because, that's what part of this discussion is to say, we're going to bring up these topics, some good points, and, please feel free to provide the feedback.
Can I bring something up really quickly?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of those points that you bring up, they're incentives for burning MKR, right? Like, burning MKR is believed to prop up the value. And so if the market cap is bigger, it's like a better recapitalization source, or, it's believed to add more DAI liquidity to the market, which it does, right? 30,000 DAI at a time, but it's kind of like marginal compared to like the big thing. It's good PR because of all of those other supporting points, right? But I'm curious, what are the incentives, or what are kind of the reasons people laid out for not burning MKR?
Yeah. Well, you actually, Dave, it's interesting you say that, because if on the flip side, it could be bad PR. It's kind of like people see the activity, see what's going on, and if you're not burning it, then what's going on? If we stop it completely, the community treats it like the protocol might be failing. You look at it also, building up our surplus buffer may be more valuable, but from a risk perspective too, burning maker is less efficient maybe than building up a capital buffer or surplus buffer and DAI. So point counterpoint, are you saying, and at least from like the engagement standpoint, is like, looking at it and saying, well, that's bad PR. People are seeing what we're doing. We're not burning maker. What are we doing in lieu of that? And so, any other thoughts about maybe what an incentive could be for not burning maker? I mean, the community is late.
Actually, Thomas, I would actually love to hear from Dama. Yeah, actually, so Dama just put up his hand. Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah. I would love to hear your perspective on the whole capital battery and burn versus surplus buffer perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, thanks. Like I have like different points, basically, which I think why surplus buffer is better to be higher than lower. But maybe like I would just like to explain the primary function of which I represent here, which is like the risk point of view. So basically, as maker protocol will grow in time, so we'll obviously issue debt and collateral, like collateralizing this debt. I think it is like completely natural to expect that as protocol grows, so must the surplus buffer. And basically the main reason here is because the primary function of surplus buffer is to offset any potential bad debt. And basically as we have more debt issued from volatile assets, which can, produce bad debt, it is completely natural to expect that surplus buffer will grow. Now, basically, like in the risk team, we like to think about this, and obviously, it is not like a fixed value or something like this, fixed percentage, but like, for example, based on current state of maker vaults and market conditions in regards to different collateral assets, we believe that the safe way to play this out would be to keep the surplus buffer somewhere around 2 to 3 or potentially more percent relative to the volatile debt. So basically, if we currently have something about 5 billion debt from volatile assets, this would put us to roughly 150 million DAI in surplus buffer. So yeah, like this is strictly like from the risk point of view. But then like, if you don't mind, I also have some opinion in regards to just like, you know, efficiency of both surplus and debt auctions. So like how I think about it is that like, you guys mentioned that, you know, like people might say that if we are not burning Maker, that we are basically, you know, that like protocol is not producing value, right? But like I would argue that this is not the case, at least how I see it, because every Maker token holder can see that, you know, surplus buffer is increasing. So obviously, you know, like we are producing positive cash flow, and then it is like just like a business decision, right? Like, what are we going to do with this surplus? Like, we can either choose to, you know, like in the traditional sense, pay out dividends, or we can, you know, choose to further invest into the protocol and like increase the growth of it. So like now when I mentioned growth, how I see the potential growth from, you know, strictly higher surplus buffer than lower surplus buffer is that like there are basically 3 points. The first one is that like with higher surplus buffer relative to the volatile debt in the system, the like the whole system and like fundamentally DAI, which is like I believe DAI holders are like the core product of the whole system, is safer, right? So I just believe that if we have safer DAI, it is much easier to, you know, like sell somebody the idea to start using DAI or integrate it in their protocol or something like this. Then like the second point about growth, which I think is relevant, is that like when we add new like these kind of systems or modules into the protocol, for example, like the recent DAI direct deposit module in Aave, basically like all of these things are to some extent experimental. So basically, if we have higher surplus buffer, we are, you know, able to say, okay, yes, we can increase the basically the debt ceiling in this module, right? But if the surplus buffer is low, we are, you know, we are kind of restricted of, you know, how aggressive we can be with these new modules. And then the third, you know, argument is like that we can afford higher spending. So basically, you know, like we can invest more in people in different core units. Like, for example, we still don't have the marketing core unit, which I think it's quite important, right? Yeah, and like if we have higher buffer, we can just, you know, afford to spend more. Yeah, like.
I have another question. Like with a higher buffer, Rema, does that mean that we can have more leeway to work with like risk related parameters for vaults? Like if we have a bigger buffer, can we systematically kind of like do lower stability fees or like, you know, kind of indirect related stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. So like for me, what would come to, you know, mind for sure is that like we can afford higher debt ceilings for some collateral assets, which are, you know, like potentially highly collateralized, but at the same time have like quite thin market liquidity. And like, for example, one of such products is, I mean, sorry, not products, collateral types is mana. So basically like, you know, there is some interest to increase the debt ceiling, but at the same time, the liquidity is quite low. And like currently the situation with mana is that all vaults in the system are like really highly collateralized because price increased, you know, like really high. And but like this still doesn't mean that like somebody will, you know, issue debt which has like really low collateral ratio. So at the same time, we can say, yes, the current state is quite safe, but like we don't know what, you know, future or like new DAI issued, like what kind of collateral ratio it will have. So yeah, I would say it's you know, really fair to say that with higher surplus buffer, we can also have more loose parameters in different vaults, like debt ceiling or even stability fee.
Yeah, super interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you know, the engagement lead, and we're working on, a lot of the information for stakeholder communications. We see that there is really, big growth going on, new core units coming on, and that's exciting. But you make a good point about the growth aspect as well. And so, thank you, Rimba, for that. That's great. That's great feedback. Thank you very much for providing us that insight. And so, with the last little piece, the make burn, we may have already addressed this, but is there a longer term solution as an automated burning strategy? And so, talked about driving forces for, driving forces against, but this manual process, surplus buffer obviously has an impact, on the make or burn. But I just wanted to pose the question before we move on to specifically talking to the surplus buffer, a longer term solution. Is that, we've talked about what we've said so far, but I was just wanting to pose this question to see if we could generate any feedback or any thoughts about what that might look like.
I think Tim would like to post less signal requests about this, if I had to guess.
No, actually not the signal request, because it's quite a long list of signal requests, but I can post them here as well. But I mean, technically we are kind of on the level that the surplus buffer needs to be in relation to the amount of DAI from volatile assets. I think that's something we can agree on.
And that's around 2%, right, Tim?
Yeah. So, well, I think this is primarily a risk thing. So I put up a pre-MIP on basically coming up with some kind of instant access module. So we avoid this governance overhead. So we don't have to manually vote on increasing it again. So we just have it in relation to the amount of DAI that we have in the system. So that could be a solution how to move this forward. I mean, looking back at how we're dealing with debt ceilings for ILGs, it's the same. We did them manually as well, and at some point of time we decided to go with an instant access module, and we can basically apply the same mechanics here as well. Okay. I guess
that's great. I think that'll be great segue into our second piece, which is going to be focusing on the surplus buffer. But before we move further, any additional comments, any more questions about this section before we move on? Well, I appreciate everybody's input on that. It was very good. So our next topic here really kind of merges into these are really kind of one of their own. But as we've spoken before, what is the surplus buffer? What is this that we're talking about here? That is really, in a little background, I just pulled some information for reference, that the surplus buffer really is parameter controls the maximum amount of DAI that can accrue to the protocol from stability fee revenue prior to my flap auction being triggered. And so as the stability fee comes in, the total amount of DAI inside the system surplus increases until it reaches system surplus buffer and surplus lot size. And at that point, a flap auction can be triggered and DAI is auctioned off from maker. This purchase maker is then burned. Also, the maker protocol only has one surplus buffer, and the stability fees from all vaults accrue to it. Increasing the surplus buffer, and there has been a lot of talk, a lot of stuff. And Tim, thank you for joining us. I know we've seen, again, a lot of these signal requests, and we've gotten up to a most recent, and the link, if you will, some of these links for the signal request are in our call notes, by the way. Part of our research we pull from the forum, we pull from the polls. It shows you some of the latest activity, especially with the surplus buffer, which is just passed with the 90 million ceiling. But we can get more into that. Just for reference, wanted to let you know that within those call notes, we've got those links as well to show the activity. So the maker protocol, again, one surplus buffer. The current state, of the surplus buffer. Where are we at right now? Well, as with the make or burn, very similar. It's manual. We come up with a signal request. We come up with ideas to push it forward. I think that is the latest that we have, but there really isn't, I think, to the point of like the burn maker, it's not really an automated process. It's coming up with, we believe that this is the right thing to do. And Tim, you talking about pushing the signal, pushing the vote, pushing the poll, getting that to the point. And I think it went, David, correct me if I'm wrong, when you want to add something to that, but we've kind of moved that along. You wanted to add some more to that process, or did you want to make a comment on the buffer?
Yeah, I was gonna say that so like the current state of the surplus buffer, I think like making larger adjustments, yeah, it's manual, but I think something that was interesting is that we do lerp any like changes. So although we just set it from 60 million to 90 million,
yeah,
it's like semi-automated, because the way it currently works is over the course of the next X amount of days, every single day, like the threshold will be adjusted little by little. And what's interesting about this solution is that it actually allows for burn to still happen if the system makes more revenue than the rate at which these little like bumps occur. So, you could, raise the buffer by like $100,000, but that day the protocol could have earned $200,000. And so you have like this really nice effect of hitting really, both birds with that stone of revenue. You get a little bit of burn and you get to save a little bit of money as a protocol.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just make that point, that it's like semi-automated, but the manual process is more like us deciding in governance, in the forums, spending our time thinking like, hey, when is the next one? What is the size of the next increase? And I think like one big goal of the community, implied by the frustration that I read in the forums, is, how do we make this not take up our time, right? Like, how do we just tie it to something, to a metric that is a little bit more automatic, like that 2% figure that Rema mentioned, and how do we kind of go from there? But at the moment, it is like the bigger like adjustments, like 60 to 90, like that was a manual governance process that had to happen.
Yeah, and just for point of reference, and it's at the most simplistic high level, the buffer is to safeguard against high risk events. It just what's the intent of the buffer. It's to safeguard against these high risk events.
And Thomas can actually share a real life story about when this actually came into play.
Yes.
Yeah, so as many of you know, and maybe some of you who are newer to the community don't, the Maker protocol actually went through quite the battle test back when COVID first started hitting, when really the markets got hit by COVID in March of 2020. So there was a really famous day called Black Thursday, in which the protocol suffered something like an exploitation that involved the liquidation system of the protocol, where a bidder essentially, because of the gas environment and because of everything, there was only a single bidder who was able to bid on liquidations that were happening at Maker, and they were bidding close to zero, and they won something like $8 million worth of Ethereum at that day's prices. At today's prices, probably like 10 times more than that. But they got themselves something like $8 million worth of Ethereum. And the protocol, as a result, wasn't able to raise that money that it was supposed to raise from the liquidations to cover the bad debt that it was liquidating, right? And so we saw the surplus buffer go from like positive 7 million, or I think it was like 14 million or something like that. No, actually, I think it was maybe like closer to 7 at the time, to negative 7 or 8 million. I forgot exactly what the numbers are, so take that with a grain of salt. But as a result, for the very first time, the protocol actually did do these not surplus auctions, but debt auctions, where MKR was minted. Previously there was like even less MKR. I think there was like 980K, but then Black Thursday happened and an additional 15,000 MKR was minted and auctioned to cover the bad debt of the protocol. And it happened. And the system was battle tested, and kind of we lived to fight another day. Yeah. The liquidation system was upgraded, and that particular scenario can't happen if it was to replay today. Yeah. And ultimately, it just goes to show how cool Maker is with regards to like anti-fragility. But yeah, I just wanted to share that real life story of the surplus buffer burn and like this whole mechanic that we're talking about in action. Yeah, it's with the hand up.
Yeah, Tim's
yeah, just two things. I mean, of course, liquidations 2.0 is a lot better than the one we had at this particular day, and I'm quite confident that we are not going to see the situation again. However, it could turn out that at some point of time we have such a large market downturn that the liquidations will run at a loss for the protocol, and this is where the system surplus is for, or the surplus buffer is for. So this is still something valuable in this situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just one addition to lerping up the surplus buffer. It basically gives a guarantee that the surplus buffer is increasing by the rate we are putting in the lerp. But this does not guarantee any kind of how much we are going to put into MKR burning. So if we face a large liquidation wave that is running good for the protocol, all the liquidation penalties turn into the system surplus as well, resulting in an overspill over the surplus buffer. So we are going to have a lot more burning. I think with the current price point of MKR, we're probably happy if this is going to happen. But yeah, sometimes I think, when was it? I think on White Wednesday, we had something like, I don't know, a couple of millions of extra income. And by the time we are already in lerping up the surplus buffer. But a lot of us said, well, this would be a nice opportunity to actually get ahead of our initial plan instead of burning. Yeah, so it's still quite a bit, I think it's still flaky, the system we have right now. I think it's good from a governance overhead perspective, because I mean, we have essentially 6 months time now to make up a plan how to proceed, because we are lerping up over, I think, 30 weeks. But we are going to end up in the same situation at some point of time anyway.
I think Peyton, thank you, Tim. I think Peyton's got his hand raised. Peyton?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only part I wanted to add was this connection to expenses as well, right? It's not just for risk events, but when we decide to fund something in the protocol, and if it's available in the surplus buffer, that's what will take the hit for us. Mm-hmm. You know, a great example of this is like the Oracle's latest budget asking for 8 million, right? If the surplus buffer is below that, then that simple expense would result in issuing new MKR and selling. So that's an important other side to it. But yeah, really great factoids and rundown there.
Thank you. Very good feedback. Thank you. Do we have another hand raised, David? Was there someone else with their hand raised? Was that it? Okay. All right. Oh, 2 participants did.
Yeah. Hey, like I would just like to say something in regards to this surplus buffer lerping, where I see that this can be problematic is basically like if we have a situation where a lot of basically surplus increase comes from liquidation penalty, we will result in a lot of surplus auctions in the short time duration. And I think like this is not really like something we want to see, because if we have a lot of surplus auctions at once, and maybe, you know, some kind of situation with clocked blockchain and like high gas fees, you know, like it can happen that, you know, some keepers will not be able to participate or something like this, and we can end up with something like really low bids for DAI sold. So like, I don't know how complex this is technically, but like basically what I think the potential solution is that like proceeds from liquidation penalty would be stored in some kind of, you know, different account. And basically with this, we would avoid this kind of sudden increase of the surplus buffer.
Yeah, I think that actually feeds into Long for Wisdom's like old idea of like a surplus buffer distributor module, where it's not just one big pool of capital that is being relied upon for all of these different concerns, and then you could like separate out the concerns that way. Your risk buffer acts as an actual risk buffer, and then your protocol expenses are actually kept on the side, protected, et cetera, et cetera. But I will shut up now because I see Tim had his hand up, and then the other Tim Black, put his hand up shortly after. So
I was quicker than the other Tim. Yeah, so I think a more sustainable solution to the situation that we have essentially not good running auctions on MKR is not redistributing the liquidation penalties to something different, because actually it's good that we burn. But to finally come up with a liquidation 2.0 approach called the clapper, that would be a lot better, because this would have the same effect as we are having with vault liquidations. They were running bad 1 year ago or 2 years ago. They are quite good now, or super robust actually. And the same will probably happen with MKR auctions as well. That's at least my bet.
Well, thank you, Tim. Yeah, Tim Black, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of to plus one the flapper distributor idea. I think one of the larger concerns for the surplus buffer is that it's one big pool, right? Whereas, I mean, now granted, there isn't like a DAO model of this, but in a traditional company, like you separate your profits out into which investments you're going to use for your like COGS, et cetera. There's been chats about it, but I think it's more important now that we think through the mechanisms that we really want to prioritize for the protocol. And so to other delegate Tim's point, I think getting moved to liquidations 2, I think Gonzalo already has code for this called the clapper, which we posted somewhere in the forums, and it's definitely on Discord, would be one of the more important things to prioritize. But I think we should definitely start to signal out like some sort of plan to basically upgrade the surplus buffer. I think that's the sort of one takeaway I'd love for us to start to experiment with as a community, is just recognizing that the burn combined with the buffer are definitely great mechanics that have served us to get to this point, but they're not going to get us to the next point we need to get to. And we need to think through which features we need to do.
Be able to have, what are our next steps? What
Oh, Thomas, I think you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, I thought it was me.
No, I think it's Thomas.
Oh no. Do we all have Starlink?
I mean, I could hear you perfectly.
I'm here as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, so I guess I'm just coming from more of like a product and engineering angle. It's like, okay, cool. What are the parameters we have now? Like, what are the inputs and parameters we need in the future? Let's like prioritize the ones that are most realistic, right? To Tim's point, like getting Clapper up seems like it makes more sense, and it's already kind of semi-coded. And then from there, we need to figure out, okay, do we want to actually pursue a distributor so that it doesn't have one pool of capital that a bunch of different interests are pulling on? Okay, then what does that look like? And actually map that out from there. That's it.
Yeah. Hey, Thomas, it looks like you're back. You disconnected there for a second, and the slides are no longer being shared.
I sure did. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second, please. I apologize. Is everybody able to view that? The slide? Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, but basically, Tim Black, like your point was that you hope as a result of this call, we will like fall or kind of all sync on what some next steps are, and what you believe are next steps are really kind of upgrading our revenue management, essentially, right?
Yeah, that summarizes it well.
That's great. All right. Tim, you still got your hand raised. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Surplus buffer. All right, wonderful. Well, that's good. Let's let's move on to, I know we've gotten a lot. We've talked about the burn, talked about the buffer. This is a few minutes here. Just wanted to, anyone that has been thinking about questions and haven't had a chance to raise their hand or comment, just want to give a few minutes here. If anybody have any other additional thoughts, comments about the topic today. So I will just open the floor and see if anybody's got anything else to add.
I guess my question is like, I know historically it has been like community OGs that have been really like driving forward next steps on a lot of stuff at Maker, like especially Tim Schuppener around surplus buffer, votes. I'm curious, to get a core unit to pick this up and prioritize it. Kind of what has to happen, and who is like I guess my question is like, who in the community should be putting forward these like directional proposals? Like, should it be recognized delegates? Should it be anybody in the community? Should it be like core unit facilitators and leaders themselves? Yeah, curious about people's views there. Yeah, Peyton says governance says anyone with a good idea. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's sort of, I don't want to sound obstructionist, but there's sort of a tyranny of structuralistness in that question, where it's like, if it's everyone's responsibility, then no one does it. That's kind of why I was pushing to some sort of like wrap up post where we have some level of takeaways and some of us can say, all right, I want to own this, or at least work with like a couple of other people to push these initiatives forward. Because, this isn't the kind of thing that gets solved in a month. This is like 2 quarters at least of like thinking and planning stuff through. It's literally central to the whole system, right? So it's going to need a lot of input and work. But I think the whole point of these open calls is to stimulate the community to sort of think through what ideas they want to bring forward, and then also to sort of think through and flesh through the options, just like the governance and risk call, right? Like, we don't make decisions on that call, we think through the next steps, right? So anyone with a good idea, I guess.
Yeah, Tim, I think you summed it up very well there. Is that's the the intent of this is to bring those issues forward, and that will lead us into our last topic today. But before we do that, I just wanted to get anybody else that had any more thoughts or feedback before we move on to our last little piece here. Okay, so Tim did already move us forward, which is shaping future topics. And so, as he pointed out, our intent, again, is to do research through the forum, through the signal requests, through what is a pertinent topic, a timely topic that we really should have a open discussion about, bringing up points, the current state, where we're at, where we want to go, and more importantly, being able to walk away saying, okay, we've got a follow-up little plan of action here. Clearly, from what I'm hearing today, it's been, a very good conversation with this surplus buffer has really triggered a lot of conversation to identify, all right, what's this longer-term solution? Who's going to be the responsible party? What should be a follow-up to that? And given that, if you can think of a future topic, and we want this to be your platform. We want this to be something that we look at for a future topic. Right now, we're just in that process. For today's topic, we thank you, Tim, for your signal request and everything that really helped us identify something that I think is very, very relevant to the company. But what about the next one? We're going to aim for these to try to be at least monthly, but we want your feedback. We're still looking at what's the most appropriate way to get that feedback. Or, hey, I've got a topic, or I've got a signal request, or I've got something that I really want to push forward. I just want in this section to ask everyone, what are your thoughts for shaping future topics? I've given my sort of 2 cents. It is no wrong or right answer. there is just an opportunity for us, and I think I'm going to let David take it from here to kind of help maybe drive this a little bit further. David?
Yeah, I just want to frame it just a little bit. I want to give just some additional context. So we also have our Thursday governance and risk call that we've recently transitioned to using as a more discussion-based call. We typically work with the mandated actors. Every Tuesday we have a meeting, and we kind of pick through a list of current events and topics, and we decide what is the most kind of pertinent issue that we could discuss this week. And oftentimes, like, those discussions are really great and they're enough. But the benefit of having like this particular issue discussion call series is that we want to produce and that we are producing a lot more detailed sort of like pre-call notes, contextual information. We want to like have more, I guess, committed buy-in for like participation from particular stakeholders that are relevant to the issue. And so, yeah, even beyond suggesting topics for this specific call, I am curious what people in the community would like to see for how they can request discussions, because at the moment they really are driven by like what we see on the forum as being like the most important stuff. We don't really have a huge amount of feedback from kind of the general community about what discussion topics are relevant.
Yeah,
so yeah, I'm curious to hear people's.
Yeah, David, to that point, it's not necessarily an information session too. This is a discussion about a topic that we want to try to move forward, or like you said, talk in more detail about. And so all right, floor is open.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So I think what would be most useful is to look at the tools you have necessary to like assemble the information around the hot topics of the community, or the ones that really need unpacking. And I greatly sympathize with your guys' job, essentially, because you essentially have to do all the legwork to come towards like making a decision together as a community, and then making sure the community takes those next steps. So it's not exactly an easy thing, but some ideas are definitely like leveraging probably Discord, and I know GovAlpha has like this anonymous question box thing. So some level of like polling people together, or trying to hold stages on Discord, or put some sort of community energy there so it's easy and quick for people to sort of put their opinions in, might be quite helpful. And then leaving some room for the anonymous members of our community to continue to push us forward and hold us to the fire, to add their opinions in. But again, that's just going to add a little bit more to your plate to have to source and put together everything and frame it into what actionable decisions can we make together. So those were two thoughts.
Great. Thank you. Tim, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, it's just, well, a bit selfish probably, because what I would really think about or talk about and get information about is, I mean, we have delegation now up for, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months or something like this. Do we actually have a proper system of, I don't know, delegates? Are they approachable by the people who previously haven't voted, or have voted and now started delegating? Is this transparent enough? Do we have enough communication between delegates in the community? Do we need maybe some kind of tools like, I don't know, town hall meetings or whatever? I mean, I'm going to run my first office hour meeting tomorrow as a delegate. Is that something helpful? I don't know, stuff like this. I just have no idea what we need here. And I guess we have a nice situation because we actually have people now that have voting power and are approachable. But I don't think we leverage that enough. So I don't know, maybe that would be something for an hour of talking with people who have ideas. That would be.
No, that's great. And, like I said, you can DM us, you can shoot us information, and everyone on the call too. If you walk away from the call and you go, oh, I should have mentioned, please, by all means, get in touch with us. We want to hear your thoughts, because this is how we will be able to build this into a very strong discussion. And I think today's discussion was very value added in the terms of walking away from it and thinking about these longer term solutions for the surplus buffer, especially. So, any other thoughts? I know we're just being mindful of time. We have about 5 minutes left, so I wanted to see if anybody had anything else to add.
Yeah, Tim Black makes a great point in the chat. He says it also might be helpful to think through a longer term sort of cadence for recurring topics or difficult topics. So like, for example, right, like how is the delegate system working? Like this is like a domain of Maker that is evolving, right? Like it just launched, and it launched without compensation, and now it has compensation, and now we have, like, instead of 3 delegates, we have like maybe like 7 or 8, and that's the case now. But 6 months from now, it might be a totally different conversation. And so, yeah, I like that whole concept of recurring sort of not chronic issues, because that's the wrong characterization, but recurring discussions on ongoing sort of matters. Like, I don't know if the issue is there, because it's not really an issue. Like delegation is, like, using delegation as an example, it's like working, right? There's not an issue. The issue is like, how do we make it better, right? So yeah.
And more importantly, oh, sorry, Thomas, my bad.
Yeah, no, just 2 seconds. And that's a great thought pattern to have, is that, and we're talking about surplus buffer today, but we're not going to not talk about it anymore. I think that's a great thing to consider as we continue to develop these, is to revisit them when if we're talking about a long-term solution for surplus buffer, maybe over the summer, maybe there's something that we need to consider as a long-term discussion topic, and so, yeah, great point.
I think that summarized it up quite well. And I think that would be actually a really great service to the community. And David's correct. They're not particularly like issues. They're just sort of, these are the complex topics with a lot of stakeholders that all have opinions about how to move forward. And we all want the same thing. So just aligning around some set of expectations and direction, I think, would be the most useful thing for those long-term topics. Say by 6 months, we want to have X decision plus like Y variables on the surplus buffer, right? Which sets up the next series of conversations, or it actually goes to PE to come back with their estimations, right? This is a very crude example, because there's no way it's going to be that simple, but we might be surprised which ones turn out to be a little easier than we think. And that's why I framed it that way.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also like a tool to refresh stagnant conversations that might still be important. They're just stagnant because it's like, okay, all of the views were shared. There's not really much progress to be made. It's just a matter of timeline and next steps, and whoever are the actors who need to take action on execution, they got to do that. So yeah, using these calls also as like a refreshing of old conversations, or reassessment of old but ongoing matters. Yeah, that's interesting perspectives.
And just as a reminder, if you've got anything else that you want to add to this, or please DM us, or please give us a contact. We are now at 12:59. I know everybody has a busy schedule. They want to be mindful of it. I think it was a great conversation today. I thank everybody for attending. Please keep your eyes peeled for January's issue discussion call. We'll be having that out here in the near future. But I think, Tim, you've got your hand raised. You got one last comment, please?
No, I was clapping. Thank you for setting this up.
Oh yeah, well, I thank my team for helping put all this together. We work together to try to bring the community together, be engaged, and I think today's conversation was really good, a pertinent topic, and I can't wait for the next call. I can't wait to follow up and to see how this goes from here. But again, thank you all for your time. This is recorded. And also, if again, last thing, we're here to help, here to listen, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all for joining.